Parsha Shemini is the first time that we are introduced to the laws of kashrut, and I wanted to explore something with you that we haven't looked at before, which is the signs of kashrus. By the way, it's interesting, right after we go through this whole temple process, the Mishkan. Everything is put together and holiness descends upon the Jewish people, we immediately launch into the laws of purity, impurity, what's kosher, what's not kosher. And Rav Kook points out that the sequence is that, this is Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, he says that the sequence is that it's one thing for us to have a national sense of holiness, but then we have to shift gears and talk about each person's individual holiness. Because if you focus too much on the national, you remove focus from what my duties are to maintain holiness within my own personal life, and then that starts the deterioration of the national holiness. So immediately after the Shekhinah comes down, the very next step is, okay, now Chevra, let's talk about each and every one of you. What are you putting into your mouth? What are you exposing yourself in life to? And that's each person's individual responsibility. That's why the laws of kashrut come immediately after the divine presence sets upon the people in the Mishkan. But let's take a look. The law of fish, okay? We want to talk about kosher fish. What are the two things you need to have in order for a fish to be kosher? Someone tell me. Okay. Scales and fins. And how do you say it in Spanish, in Espanol? What is it? Escamas. Scale. And aleta. Okay. Escamas and aleta. Okay. Scales and fins. Okay. Scales and fins. So the Gemara tells us actually something fascinating. The Gemara tells us in Masechet Chulin, source number 1, Tanan Hatam, we have a Mishnah that teaches us, Kol sheyesh lo kaskeset yesh lo snapir, v'yesh sheyesh lo snapir ve'ein lo kaskeset. That there are some aquatic creatures that have fins but have no scales. But if an aquatic creature has scales, then it automatically has fins. In other words, there's no such creature that exists that has scales but does not have fins. Now, what question should immediately pop up in your mind?
Why do you have to say you need both?
Exactly. Why does the Torah say you need to have both scales and fins? If every fish that has scales has fins, then ultimately what is the sign of kashrut? Scales, not fins. So the Gemara says, Yesh lo kaskeset v'yesh lo snapir dag tahor. Yesh lo snapir ve'ein lo kaskeset dag tameh. So the Gemara says, if it has scales and it has fins, it's a kosher fish. If it has fins but it doesn't have scales, it's a non-kosher fish. So mechte, a kaskeset kasamchinan, lichtov rachmana kaskeset v'lo lichtov snapir. So the Gemara says, well, I don't understand. If the criterion ultimately is scales, then just let the Torah just write, if a fish has scales, it's kosher. Don't tell me scales and fins. You hear the question? Everyone got the question. So the Gemara goes, I'm skipping a few lines from the Gemara, but ultimately the Gemara's answer is, Amar Rabbi Avahu v'chein tana devei Rabbi Yishmael, Yagdil Torah v'yadir. 3-word answer. Yagdil Torah v'yadir, from a pasuk in Isaiah. What do those words literally mean? God increases the Torah and makes it strong. Now, that's the answer of the Gemara. Can anyone tell me what they think the answer means?
Double check.
Double check? What do you mean? Like
It's double check. Like
even if it has the scales, check it a little bit more. Even though you know that if it has scales, it's for sure kosher, but check it a little bit more. Maybe why? Why does God say check it more? Maybe to reward me. Maybe to like a lot of times the Torah will tell me that if I violate a certain commandment, I get a double penalty. I violate 2 mitzvot, so that the penalty is double. Maybe the Torah is pointing out that if I eat a fish that's kosher and I avoid fish that are not kosher, I get a double reward. Not only did I eat a fish that has scales, I also ate a fish that has fins. Even though I could have gotten by with just scales, but God wanted to increase my reward. That's the way some of the commentaries understand what this answer means. Yagdil Torah v'yadir could also mean that God just wants us to study more Torah. The Torah could have left out the whole piece of information about fins, but it wants you to learn, it wants to give you more information, even though you don't need the information. The information is added because sometimes the Torah adds unnecessary information, because the more you study, the more reward you receive. I want to show you 3 perspectives on what the deeper meaning of this Gemara is. And ultimately, what is the ultimate answer is, in trying to understand why would the Torah talk to me about fins if scales is sufficient. And the answer is that fins and scales are not just external markers of a kosher fish. They are the defining features of what makes a fish kosher. Let me just say that again. They're not just symptoms of a kosher fish. They are the defining features of what makes a fish kosher. Why is the fish kosher? Because it has scales and because it has fins. These are not just the signs to determine whether the fish is kosher, but the Torah is telling me the thing that makes it kosher is that it has scales and it has fins. Now, what do we mean by that? So we're going to have to find something relevant in scales and fins that make it kosher, and therefore apply that lesson to ourselves, that we have to have scales and fins also.
Maybe it's similar to what makes an animal kosher, the split hoofs and chewing its cud, and, Chazal extrapolate what those things stand for, so maybe it's the same idea.
Yes. Okay, so I'm going to show you 3 perspectives on what fins and scales really represent, okay? So the first one is just quoted from Torah Sheba'al Peh from Hagon Reb Shlomo Alter, the Rosh Yeshiva of Sfat Emet, of Sfas Emes, a Rosh Yeshiva. I'm not sure when this was written, but it's brought from a contemporary sefer. And he writes, Yesh Yehudim shemistapkim bazeh, sheliban shelahem yesh siman tahara echad. He says there are some Jews who are satisfied if they only have one symptom of being spiritually kosher. And what is that symptom? Kaskeset limagen. What is, I have scales to protect me. I have scales. I have a shining armor all around me that protects me from any spiritual harm. Shemit badel min hagoyim v'shomer Shabbos v'oichel kashrus u'chedoyim. That he separates from the goyim, and he's Shabbos observant, and he eats kosher. He does all the things that a Jew needs to do to retain his defenses of purity. Okay, so he's a sur meira kind of Jew. What does that mean, sur meira? He separates himself from anything bad. Kosher. I don't have the internet in my house. I have all the things that I'm supposed to have to protect me with that coat of armor to protect me from all of the external damage outside. Omnam lo zeh haderech. But that's not the way to go. Ela b'nosaf lekaskeset tzarich gam snapir lashut b'meimei hada'at shel haTorah. But if you're not moving, because you don't have fins to propel you forward through the water, so then that's not enough just to be protected. He says you got to be able to swim and constantly move forward in life to swim through what he calls the waters of knowledge of Torah. Lichanech sheyitzlol b'yam haTalmud u'lahagdil Torah laha'adira. You have to be constantly advancing in your Torah knowledge, in your intellectual knowledge. And that's what it means, lahagdil Torah lahadira. to be able to increase Torah study is a reference to the fins themselves. The fins are a metaphor for the human endeavor that every Jew has to be engaged in, which is to enrich themselves through Torah study and through the knowledge of the world around them. So therefore, the kaskeset is the armor, the protective coat of armor that a fish has to make sure that it is spiritually immunized from the outside. But you need more than that. You need the fins as well to propel you forward, to keep advancing and growing. And if not, then it's not enough just to be Shomer Shabbos and Shomer Kashrus. You've got to be advancing, swimming forward constantly. Okay, beautiful idea, yes? Okay, so that's our first idea. Second idea from the Shalah HaKadosh, a little bit deeper. The Shalah HaKadosh from the 16th century writes, Hinei Talmidei Chachamim nimshulu ledagim sheparim v'ravim. This is source number 3. He says, Torah scholars are compared to fish who are fruitful and multiply. Ve'amru b'chagiga u'chemismarot netuim. That the words of Torah, it says King Solomon in Ecclesiastes, are like nails that are embedded in a board. Manetiyazu paravirava, but netuim could also be referring to planted. The word planted means, like says the Gemara, just like a plant is constantly growing and increasing, af divrei Torah parim v'ravim, so too words of Torah have to constantly grow. V'ha'oskim b'sodot ha'torah tzololim b'mayim adirim va'amukim, v'heim kedoshim u'toharim kemotam. So those who delve into the deeper aspects of Torah study are going to be holy and pure, and they will continue to grow. Utnan kaskasin hakavuen bo senapirim haporeach bahen. And Torah scholars, therefore, have scales that grow in them to protect them and to allow them to be enriched. Ve'ata hafaresh hasod kaskasin hakvuin romez al ma shekibel mirabo, v'hu b'chinat chochma, u'snapir asher mitpashet behem b'chinat habina shekol hamolid, u'bazeh yagdil Torah. So I'll just tell you very briefly what the Shalah says. He says like this. The scales of a fish represent what a Jew has received from his teacher. The tradition that I receive from my teacher are the scales that I have been encased in from the time that I was a youth. I was trained and brought up by my parents in order to know what to do. And those are the scales on my body. But the fins are what I innovate on my own. What I am able to branch out and go beyond what I have received as a tradition. I can now swim with my fins. So that's another insight into the difference between scales and fins. He says, scales are that which I receive from my teacher because they're embedded within me. I'm inculcated with an education from an early age from my parents, from my teachers. Those are the scales that are embedded within me. And then what are my fins? Once I've gotten properly embedded with Torah knowledge and Judaism, now I got to go out on my own. I got to discover my own pathway to become close with Hashem. I can't just be happy with what I've received from others. I have to now swim and discover what I'm going to, forge my own path. So that's the second explanation as to what fins and scales mean. Okay? And now I'll give you a third explanation as what fins and scales are. And this is from a sefer that quotes a lengthy commentary from Rabbi Yaakov Leiner, known as the Beis Yaakov, who is from the Ishbitz dynasty. Okay, so from the 19th century, and the reason I'm quoting it from this sefer is because it's much lengthier in the original text, but this is sort of a synopsis, and he writes as follows: Disanapir sheporeach bo moreh al bichira she'eno mishuka beta'ava what does the fin represent? It represents that a person has free will. Because after all, what does a fin allow you to do? You can swim in any direction as a fish that you like. You can zig, you can zag, you can turn left, you can turn right, you can move upwards, you can move downwards. How do you do that? With your fins, if you're a fish. You know what I just thought of? I just thought of Don Knotts. Anyone know why I just thought of Don Knotts?
Yeah.
What was that movie, The Incredible Mr. Limpet from the 1960s? Some of the pop trivia that pops into your head when you're learning Torah is so distracting. But anyway, if anyone's ever seen that film, it's a film about a guy who turns into a fish. But anyway, okay. So it's an animated movie. So the fin allows you to move in all different directions. So that is demonstrative of the fact that I have free will. I can go in any direction that I want to go. The kaskeset moreh al davar kavua, shenitba bo kedusha b'shoresh uteshuka kavua hamevi'ah bitachon utkifut la'adam. What does the scale represent? It's something that's embedded in my body and my skin. So a scale represents the inborn holiness that I was born with. You see, everyone was born with a certain dosage of holiness that is completely independent of what I make of myself. It's basically nature versus nurture. You understand? So the nature part of who I am is my scales, and what I choose to do with those God-given gifts is my fins. Those are my fins. V'lachein, kol sheyesh lo kaskeset yesh lo snapir. And therefore, the Gemara is very profound. If you were born with scales, which demonstrates that you were born with an innate holiness in your neshama, then you truly have free will. Demi sheyesh lo kedusha b'shoresh hu ba'al b'chira. Because someone who has holiness in his inner essence, in his source, that person can freely choose between good and evil. Aval mi shenir'eh keba'al b'chira, im ein lo kedusha kavua, gam b'chirato eina amitit. But if a person was not born with a healthy dosage of innate holiness, even though it seems like he's freely choosing of his own volition, he's really not. You can only choose freely to choose the good if you were born initially with a certain goodness embedded within you. V'sha'alo, and that's what the Gemara means. It means that any fish that has scales automatically has fins. But there are some that have fins, and they look like they're swimming in every direction which they want to go. But really, if you don't have that innate holiness to start with, you're really being pulled by the current. Even though it looks like you're swimming with your fins, you're really not. You're actually being pulled in a certain direction. V'sha'alu di'imkein sagi lichtov kaskeset. And then the Gemara says, well then, just right, all you need is scales. And v'heshivu yagdil Torah v'yadir. And the Gemara's answer is, yagdil Torah v'yadir. What does that mean? Sheyesh ladat d'mashe bachar bo Hashem yitbarach, eno rak mipnei kedushato hakavua, el mipnei sheyesh bo gam b'chira. He says, the reason why God chooses me, if God chooses me as his agent, it's not just because I was born with Kedusha, but it's also because he expects me to choose wisely. And so therefore, the Gemara says it's not just enough to know that you were born with innate holiness. You also have to use that holiness to choose wisely in life. So therefore, you need both kaskeset and you need snapir. You need both the scales of having been born with innate holiness, Kedusha, and you need to use that Kedusha that you were born with to choose wisely and to know which way to swim. And that's what the Gemara is trying to communicate, is that the only way that you will become truly great in life is if you have both. You acknowledge and you identify what is that holy element that is within myself, and you use that holy element to swim in the right directions in life, to choose wisely based on those innate gifts that I've been born with. So I'll just review our three interpretations as to why the Torah finds it necessary to tell me that I need fins if scales would be enough. And ultimately, all three answers relate back to the idea that these are not just symptoms of kashrus, but they are the features which define what is kosher. And they are metaphors for the human condition, that every human being needs both scales and fins. So the first thing we saw on the most basic level is that kaskeset represents protecting myself from evil, and fins represents going out and doing positive and proactive things. If I just have scales, and I'm always just watching to make sure that I don't have the schmutz of the outside world in my life, that's not enough. I've got to keep advancing, keep swimming, and going against the tide, and keep swimming upstream and really doing great things in my life. That's explanation number one. Explanation number two from the Shalah HaKadosh is that the scales of life represent the Judaism that I was taught by my Babis and Zaydis, and the Torah that I received from them, that has been embedded within me from my youth. But the fins is the path, the unique path that I need to forge in my life in discovering my own Torah and my own relationship with Hashem. That's independent of anything that came before me. And finally, from the Beis Yaakov, he says that scales represent the innate holiness that I was born with. And I have to identify that first. And once I've identified the scales of who I am, really the armor that God gave me, the God-given talents and the God-given holiness that I have, then I am expected to exercise bechira chofshit, my own free will, to choose wisely using those talents. In other words, harnessing those talents and using them for the right things in life. Those are the fins. Then I can maneuver and choose which way I want to go with those scales that God gave me. Okay? So that's 3 insights into why a fish needs to have fins and scales. So the next time you're eating your salmon, I want you to think about that. Not the gefilte fish, because you won't be able to tell whether it has fins or scales. But when you eat a piece of salmon, just think about that. That the salmon is a great fish because it's always swimming upstream, right? Always going against the current. And that's sometimes what we have to do as the Jewish people. It's a good siman. It's a good siman for who we are. And we should always try and remember that. Okay, have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.